Today, we're going to talk about the key things service providers, agencies, consultants, and industry experts are taking advantage of when it comes to growing or scaling their businesses with custom apps. When they play their cards right, these types of people have three critical factors playing in their favor. You might be in a similar position, and this video will walk you through exactly how you can take advantage of fast-moving trends too. I'm Kristen Youngs, co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we help founders build custom apps to start or scale their businesses. Let's dive right in. We're in the midst of a massive change in the way solopreneurs and small teams are scaling their businesses, and it all has to do with apps, and more specifically, apps built without coding. See, in the past, growing a company typically meant one of two things. One, growing a team size, or two, expanding the number of hours worked, because each of those things will allow businesses to take on more clients or customers. But it also often meant going into debt or bankruptcy in cases where the previous scenarios weren't executed well, because both of those paths can be a real fight to sustain. But that's all changing because of software. Whereas in the past, a new or growing business might have needed expanding offices, extra team members to handle manual business processes, and simply more and more of the same in order to continue scaling. Now they have apps to handle a lot of the work. They have things like QuickBooks, Slack, Zoom, Stripe, Asana, Trello, Dropbox, MailChimp, Calendly, PayPal, and more. With these types of apps, businesses and solopreneurs are able to take back their time and expand their capacity. In other words, they're able to grow more easily and quickly than ever before. But this isn't really news at this point, right? In fact, whether you've started truly scaling your business or not yet, you probably already use some of these apps. So, how exactly are we on the verge of a monumental shift in how small teams, businesses, and solopreneurs are scaling their businesses? Well, to start, the availability of apps has changed the face of business growth forever. But there's still a plague putting a cap on growth for those small businesses, the agencies, the consultants and service providers, solopreneurs, or experts trying to solve industry-wide problems. While there are plenty of apps and software programs available to help streamline business operations and spur growth, and even ones you can customize, most of them are generalized. And what I mean by that is they're not niched down enough to truly help the majority of small teams or businesses conquer the growth they're after. For example, for anyone who has their own business or plays an integral part in another, you likely have many internal processes you handle with apps. You might use apps for things like client or employee management, hiring or recruiting, inventory or project management, sales and marketing, fulfillment, and more. But those apps likely don't cover all your needs. Maybe you're using an inventory management app that's built for companies like yours, but not for your company specifically. And because of that, you're still left with more manual work than you want. And that manual work is limiting how much you can truly scale. Or maybe you have an app for managing customers and clients, but it's old and outdated, and it's actually hurting you more than helping you. Maybe you use an app to help with fulfillment or project management, but it's lacking a critical component your specific business needs. And because of that, you have to use another app in combination with it. And getting them to work together is cumbersome and frustrating. Or maybe you use an app for some other process, and the app itself is fine. But because you use it so closely, you know exactly how to make it better. And if you could make an app to better help with your own business or job operations, it would probably help companies like yours too. Well, in the past, people in your position, people with insight that could change a business or even an entire industry, They didn't really have many options for getting the exact type of pinpointed functionality they needed. Because to build a completely customized app to handle all their necessary processes, they'd have needed access to easily $100,000 or more in funding. And if you're not running an enterprise company, that's just not realistic. Sure, you could create a product in order to get funding, but even creating the initial product could easily cost tens of thousands of dollars. So instead of having a custom app that could help their business or companies in their industries grow, they were left using the old and outdated programs, the still too manual processes, and the cumbersome combination of too many interconnected apps. And sure, those compromises are better than having no apps at all, but they're still compromises. But you're not living in that world. Enter the growth of no-code app building tools. Right now, we're witnessing and working with small businesses, agencies, consultants, and industry experts to get the kind of customized apps they need and want without things like development costs of not just tens of thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, without sacrificing quality for cost. Because if the funding isn't there, sometimes the initial reaction is to find cheap labor, and without losing control of their app by handing it off to someone else. And not only that, they're moving from idea stage straight into the user testing stage with surprising speed. Here's why. When you're building an app for your business or industry, you have 3 key benefits over people who are building an app based on a cool idea they have. Number 1, you've already identified a problem. See, most people think of ideas first. They think of an app idea and then try to figure out who would use it, who would pay for it, and whether those people would really need it. In other words, they come up with an idea and then have to go through a long validation process. But when you identify a problem in your business or industry first, you have a distinct advantage because your idea validation stage is primarily already complete. You already know people need the app you want to build because you've already experienced the problem yourself. You know it's there, you know it needs solving, and you know how to solve it. Thus, you can skip the trial and error of idea validation and move into product validation, which is when you build your core product and start testing it. Number 2, you already know who your market is. When people are building apps based on ideas they have and not problems they've identified and experienced, they often find themselves questioning who they should try to sell their idea to. One of the most common questions we hear from people in this position is, how do I find test users? Or how do I identify my market? Or how do I know whether people will actually want my app or not? And when they can't answer simple questions like that, whether they know it or not, they're actually walking straight into an even bigger problem. Without knowing who your market is, there's no way to know the exact core features your MVP app needs, your minimum viable product. Because if you don't really know who the app is for, how will you possibly know what core features users are going to need? And to take it even further, not knowing what core features to build and test is a recipe for scope creep, which is when you build way more than you should right from the start. And scope creep leads to extended timelines, increased costs, and resources just sucked dry. But if you're building an app for your business or industry, you already know exactly who your market is, because in all likelihood, your market is you or your colleagues, clients, your management, competing companies, or even your personal contacts. And because you know them so well, you know exactly which core features they'll need in an app. You know because you have personal experience with the problem you're solving, and you know which features will solve it. And just like not having a market can lead other people down a snowball-like path of resistance, knowing your market can help you do the exact opposite. By having an easy to identify scope, your roadmap for development becomes straightforward. And when that happens, you lessen the chance of running into scope creep, expanding timeframes, increased costs, and resources sucked dry. And number 3, you already have test users. This one is an even bigger question mark for a lot of people than the previous point. If you don't know who your market is, imagine trying to find initial test users for your app. It can feel nearly impossible. Without test users, though, it's hard to build a solid app because you have to get feedback from test users in order to build a product people will actually want to use. Development should happen in distinct phases, and between each of those phases should come rounds of testing. People building apps for their businesses or industries don't have to deal with the problem of finding test users, though, because either they themselves are their test users, if they're building an app for their own business, their own job, etc., or they already have connections with people who they could easily bring on board as test users. And these are the colleagues, the clients, and the connections we just talked about. So when you put all of that together, what does it mean for you? Well, if you're building an app for your business or industry, it means a massive portion of the work is already done for you. See, when people start building an app based simply on an idea they have, their app building journey looks something like this. The planning and discovery phase is a year or more. And this is where they try to figure out if people need their app, and if so, whom. Their building phase is a year or more. And this is when the actual development takes place. It often takes either a year or more, or it never really ends because there was no defined scope to begin with. The project often stalls. And the marketing and launch phase is a year or more. And this is when they try to promote their app and bring people on board. This often takes a long time because the target market was not correctly identified from the start. But when people start building an app based on a business or industry problem they're solving, their path looks vastly different. Their planning and discovery phase is minimal because they've personally lived through the planning and discovery in their day-to-day work lives. They often experience the problem firsthand, and if not, they know people who do, and it's as simple as talking to them. Their building phase takes a few months because they have a much easier time defining their scope. And because of that, they can build and test in phases. And that means they can build their core product quickly, move directly into testing, and then continue building based on data instead of guesswork. And their marketing and launch phase doesn't even compare. Instead of having a big launch, which you can think of as a grand opening, they continuously soft launch internally or to test users, and then to beta users, and so on. And those test and beta users tend to become their paying users. And it's easy to find those paying users because they're the coworkers, the clients, companies, and contacts they already have. Instead of having their app building process take literal years, some of these founders are going from idea stage to having paying users in as little as 5 months. Now, that's certainly not to say it's easy. The founders we work through this process with are putting in the work necessary. But in the grand scheme of things, this is monumental. These people are scaling their own businesses, starting new businesses, and completely changing their career paths because, number one, they're taking advantage of the current no-code tools available to them, and number two, they have those 3 major benefits that result from their business or industry experience: knowing the problem they're solving, knowing their market, and having easy access to test users. And one of the coolest parts about all this is we're seeing people building apps like this for all kinds of industries, from real estate to insurance, construction, mining, long-haul delivery, consumer production, and tons of service-based organizations. The list could go on. If you're making a shift in your business or career path and you play your cards right, going from idea to testing can be relatively quick. We have a colleague, for example, who's an attorney. For her, growth and scale were dependent on billable hours. How many could she fit into her schedule? How much could she charge? Or how willing was she to grow a team around her? But none of those options felt right. She didn't want to expand her schedule or manage a large team. And at a certain point, increasing her rate would only get her so far until her growth capped out again. So she decided to build an app. And because she had experience as an attorney, she had firsthand knowledge of the kinds of day-to-day struggles other people like her experienced. And instead of taking the traditional route toward growth, she instead began transitioning away from her hourly work and into a scalable app model instead. She had the problem already identified. She knew the market like the back of her hand, and she had tons of potential test users she could easily reach out to. In truth, the groundwork has already been laid for people in similar positions. The next steps are to refine the framework and actually build the app. If you already know the problem your app will solve, and you want to experience growth in your business or career without following the traditional trajectories, take advantage of the opportunities others in your position are capitalizing on right now. They're doing it, and you can too. All right, I hope that helped shed some light on how you too can take advantage of these trends and open the doors to true growth and scale. If you learned something new today, go ahead and click the subscribe button right below this video so you can stay updated on every new video released. And if you want to take this way further, head to coachingnocodeapps.com and sign up for our extended training series. It's completely free. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.